Hello, beautiful witches. It's been a while since I've been on. Like normal, I'm often very sporadic. But I wanted to talk today about witchcraft, but also about politics. And, some witches don't feel the need to become at all involved in politics or in, the kind of the wider goings on of society. And while it's true that witches are often seen as outcasts or as living on the edge of society, it's also true that witchcraft's been involved in rebellion and revolution and kicking back throughout history, really. You could look at the rebellion in Haiti, or you might believe the stories about the medieval witches, who, some of that was a rebellion against Christianity coming in, and also about the way that the religion and the laws of the land were being enforced. And you can see, certainly in the UK, that the pagan believers still carved pagan symbols and faces into Christian churches in order to rebel. Really, it was a quiet rebellion so that they would still be able to keep their religion, because the Christians trying to enforce it didn't understand or notice that those symbols were there a lot of the time. So I think that, with witchcraft, you could say that responsibility comes with witchcraft in the sense that you have recognized your power and you're using it. There are a lot of powers that can come with witchcraft or be associated with witchcraft. You've got the power of sight. One of the powers that I talk about a lot is the power of voice, which I think, for witches and non-witches is really important. Now, for witchcraft, you look at power of voice in a slightly different way at times, but nevertheless, that power is, I think, one of the most important powers that we have. And I also think that great magic can come when we look not only at ourselves and, what's going on within us, but also at the society that we come from, and whether that is, your town or your city or your entire country, or perhaps even wider than that, your continent or your world. I think that it's really important, or it can be really important, to look at those wider aspects. And as a witch, we can choose, do we want to try and have an influence on them? In the book Apocalyptic Witchcraft, they're talking about the climate issues at the moment, and really, they're talking about the apocalypse as relating to the climate and climate change and the destruction of the earth that's gone on now, really for millennia. Hold on, sorry, there's my son's off school, and because he's unwell, so he's going to interrupt a lot, I think. So I also feel it's really important to talk about what is happening in the UK at the moment. First, I want to say why I feel it's important, because in the UK, where I'm from, we're so lucky in so many respects. We have so many freedoms. So, by speaking out, I'm not going to be arrested or tortured or murdered. As a woman, I have the right to vote, which, ancestors who came before me fought really hard for. And we really respect that in my family as part of our witchcraft practice. So across the world, people are fighting for freedom. They are dying in order to try and get those freedoms. They're being tortured. They are dying to fight against fascist regimes. Look at those in Syria who held peaceful protests and then were shot, arrested, tortured, killed, held in prisons against their will, and without true reason, for wanting a fair opportunity to vote and a fair government. I believe that to honour all those ancestors who came before me and allowed me these freedoms, secured me these freedoms, and to honour all those who are fighting to get freedom for themselves and, for those who are going to come after them or are living with them now. I think in order to honour that, I should use my right to speak where I can. And, in the UK right now, it can be hard to believe that many people are having their rights taken away, because we see all the time all the atrocities going on in the other parts of the world, and we see horrific things happening and real terror and fascism going on in other countries. But what we need to remember is that these things, they don't happen overnight. It's a journey into fascism and strict regimes and strict laws. And, it's a journey that many people close their eyes to or allow themselves to be caught up in. And while it's true that we are less likely to become a dictatorship, it's also absolutely true that we are moving further and further into laws that hurt and have really serious repercussions for different groups of people. And that we have a government who is causing anger and unrest in our society. So, I think it's very important for me to speak out against that, because it's something that I really disagree with. I have never voted for the Conservative Party, and I would never vote for the Conservative Party. And whilst people should have the right to have different opinions and the right to have different beliefs, I don't believe that a lot of the people who are in the Conservative Party truly believe that it's the right thing for the majority to have the laws that they're putting in place. I think that they are aware that it benefits themselves and other people who are very well off, and that it doesn't benefit a huge majority of people who are not really well off financially. So in the UK at the moment, there are 14.3 million people in poverty. 22% of people are in relative low income, and 19% are in absolute low income. Since 2010, we've had a Conservative government in some form, beginning with the coalition government that ended in 2015, which is the year my son was born. And the country voted Conservative again. One of the things that the Conservatives like to tell us is that working is the way out of poverty. The problem is that they themselves are proving that that's not the case. So obviously, in order to lift people out of poverty, you do need to, well, first of all, you need to put in the education. You need to make sure that people are being educated well and that the jobs are available for when they finish education. But you also need to make sure that those jobs are being fairly paid and that the market prices aren't so high that the wages that people are earning can't match those prices. And the problem is that with capitalism, the competitive markets can push prices up. and that can be a problem. So at the moment, 70% of children living in poverty in the UK are from families where their parents work. Okay, so they're from working families. So we can see that despite the Conservatives telling us again and again that working's the way out of poverty, it's clearly not working. So something is going wrong. And, you know, again and again in country after country, we see strict laws being enforced, poverty created, groups being picked out and segregated, and people are angry and upset to be in the position they're in. They're scared and overwhelmed. And both the media and the politicians find a way to direct this fear and anger onto certain groups of people, and away from the government. So I'm going to go back to that point in a minute, but I also, hang on, I am trying to find my phone, which is apparently more difficult than we first thought. Hold on. Only because I wanted a statistic from it. So The Independent, which is a more left-wing paper than, for example, so you've got like the Mirror and the Sun, who tend to publish quite right-wing things. So I was talking about how groups are being hurt by this government and people are having their rights taken away. So in the UK, many of us have strong beliefs about there being a good benefit system in place. But for a really long time, there's been this media story about how people on benefits are lazy. You know, they want to sit down and not work and just get paid. But in reality, most of the time, people are on benefits because they're in difficulty. So whether that is because you've had to leave work to care for a sick relative, whether that's because you're sick yourself or disabled yourself, you know, whether it's because you're a woman who has had to run away from an abusive household. They're all things that contribute, or a man for that matter, who's run away from an abusive household. That all contributes to, you know, people who are within the benefit system. But you also have people who perhaps had childhoods where they didn't get educated. And a lot of the time, those people have had difficult childhoods and they haven't had the chance to learn. Because if you're living at home and you are hungry or you're stressed out because your parent, you know, is unwell or perhaps, you know, abuses drugs and alcohol, or you're a young carer for your siblings, you don't have that chance to learn. And there's also something to be said about the fact that in dangerous areas, it can be harder to learn, or there can be less money put into areas who haven't performed as well in education. So there's all of these different contributing factors, and a lot more than I've just said. That's just like a snippet examples. But since 2013 in our country, so already the Conservatives were in government, more than 17,000 sick and disabled people have died whilst waiting for welfare benefits. And I don't know if people in other countries have heard about how the UK has moved on to universal credit. It's a new benefit system and it's caused a lot of issues. We've had a massive rise in people using food banks because they cannot afford food. And we've also had, well, there have been people within that 17,000 sick and disabled people who died whilst waiting for welfare benefits. There have been people that starved to death or died. There was a woman suffering with severe anorexia who died in her flat because she couldn't afford heating. And obviously anorexia nervosa lowers the body temperature. When you're at a low body weight, you have a very, very low body temperature. And you can already be hypothermic, so it's very dangerous for you to be in cold conditions. So these are the kind of things that are going on right now in the UK. And I'm just going to go back to this idea that that the media and the government are creating a narrative, really, that directs people's anger and unrest away from them and towards other groups of people. So for a long time, a narrative was being created that people coming into the UK, and the media will call them immigrants just broadly, people coming into the UK were taking jobs away from people who are in the UK. Now, evidence doesn't support that. We see less racism, services, general services improving when people are allowed to come into other countries. And I also want to highlight the fact that in my generation, so I went to university in 2010, and in my generation, the majority of my friends either went abroad to study, went abroad for a gap year, went to work abroad. I still have friends who are travelling, and this is school friends and uni friends. So obviously at university, a lot of my friends were originally from other countries, but a lot of the UK resident friends that I have either moved country or gone away. And I think it's just bonkers that we are saying, oh, you know what, it's fine for us to go to another country. And often you'll find as well that I think we have a reputation for this, that we'll go to another country, for example, Spain, and we will go to a British area of Spain. I mean, what? And then we won't bother to learn the language. I think, Spain's quite famous for expats going there. So, I think the whole thing is bonkers. But yes, so we are seeing that this narrative has been created, that it's immigrants taking jobs. And in reality, it really doesn't work like that. And a lot of the issues are that when there are social issues, which the Conservative and right-wing governments cause, and also, global economic issues can cause too. But when there are these kind of issues going on, people struggle more in education. So if you come out of education and you don't have those grades, it becomes much harder for you to get opportunities, within work. But also, if you're not getting work, you're relying on benefits. You're relying on, trying to find work where there isn't much available because you have to be qualified for it. You're relying on trying to get into university, which might not work because a lot of the time, you need the grades to get into university. And the problem is that a lot of jobs in this country, they rely on degree level training. So, you have to have that qualification at university level in order to get a job. Now, when I came out of university, which would have been 2013, when I got married, there were barely any jobs in my sector. It was highly competitive. We were having a massive issue with people, well, companies and things taking on interns and not paying them, but you would have to do the work, and you might have to have several internships before you got paid. So this was the kind of situation that we were all put in, and it's part of the reason actually that a lot of my friends ended up going traveling, because or going to work in other countries, and those jobs weren't super important jobs. They were literally just, they'd go and work on a farm in another country just in order to be able to be somewhere different and have new experiences. But when you can't get a job, it can be so demoralizing, can't it? And it did make people angry. And this narrative that was being created about immigration really played on the racist mindset that a lot of the country is still in. And I think it's really important that we recognise that there is a lot of racism in the UK. And there's a lot of racism which is excused by people saying, I'm not racist, but, and then making a racist statement. And, I've heard so many racist remarks in my time. And I do think it's important that where possible we call people out on it, and we do call the country out on it as well. Our Prime Minister has been completely racist. He's made completely racist statements. And I know that in the media, he's often compared to Trump. And I believe that, internationally, he's almost seen as, Trump's puppet in certain areas. And why do we have someone racist in our government leading the country? It's just, I think it's abhorrent. It's completely wrong. He shouldn't even be allowed to work in politics because he's made those statements. And it's massively contributed to the rise of racism and racist attacks within the UK. So that is, I can find the statistics potentially in a minute, but that is a massive issue. Since the Tories have been in power, there has been, and since Brexit particularly, the arguments around Brexit, there has been a massive rise in the number of racist attacks and racist incidents. So I think, how am I going to put this? This narrative, although it played on racist ideas that were already within the country, particularly in places where, if you look at places where there aren't as many immigrants, it's even higher. And also within people who are really struggling to get jobs and feel very wronged in the way that their life has played out so far. This narrative is essentially propaganda. So the Leave campaign for Brexit, which I think the vote happened in 2016, and I want to remind people that it was a 4% margin, so I think 52% of people voted to leave and 48% to remain. And that is important because despite the fact that a lot of, some people voted because they believe that their industry in particular, so for example, farming, fishing, might benefit from a change of law around imports and exports and what's allowed to be sold and what isn't. So, for example, like regulation size and things like that for products. But realistically, the majority of people who voted for racist reasons. I didn't hear anybody who actually had a good reason. I haven't heard anyone who has actually had a good reason to vote leave. And that's not me saying I disagree with some of the reasons, industry-based reasons. That's me saying all of the people that I spoke to face-to-face about it who voted leave because of their fears about immigration. And, Nigel Farage actually used a poster that was based on a Nazi poster of immigrants flooding into the country. It's absolutely ridiculous. But I don't really see that as, I suppose it could be like a massive philosophical argument. It's how free are you ever to vote independently, because you're always made up of bits and pieces from your own experience and from society and your society's beliefs. But realistically, that kind of propaganda, that's not really allowing people to vote freely and creating a situation where people are already angry and, feeling like they want to put blame on somebody. I see that really as manufacturing it. That's not, I don't think you can argue against the fact that it is manufactured. And because before this all happened, okay, if you'd stopped somebody in the street and said, what do you know about the EU? They probably wouldn't have any idea at all. Now, it's all people are talking about, isn't it, Brexit? But no one still has real information on it. So the EU, they fund social projects, they fund research, they fund agriculture, and obviously we as a member country currently pay a membership fee, which, if you think about it, this makes sense, because if you want to be a member of a swimming club, you get certain benefits to that, and you pay a fee in order to be a member, okay? That's how it works. And I'm confused about why so many people are up in arms about this membership fee, and why we as the UK are trying to go there and say, do you know what? I want all the benefits. So it's like if I walked into a swimming club and I said, do you know what? I want to be able to use your pool at these certain times. I want to be able to compete in the competitions and take the coach there, which I don't have to pay extra for because I'm a swimming club member. And I want the kit and, I want the training. But I don't want to have to pay for those things. I mean, I'd be laughed out, right? But apparently we can't get that into our heads in the UK that it's bloody ridiculous, okay? I fail to understand that. Anyway, so there is this whole culture in the UK at the moment of believing that if we leave the EU, we're going to be better off. But in reality, right, what's happened is if we leave the EU, so for example, we were going to leave without a deal at one point. Now, I marched against that because a no-deal Brexit would be really dangerous and would definitely affect the poorest in our country, who the Conservatives have already affected negatively. and it's at the point where I actually have food stored, like I have a massive cupboard in my house, which is known in my house as the Brexit cupboard. And we, as a joke, have put EU flags in it. We got them at a march, and my son wanted to put them up, so we were like, okay, we'll put them there. But you've got to laugh, haven't you, in these situations? But it's because we're not very well off. Like, we're well off in lots of ways, and we're very lucky because we own our own house and our own land. But if you look at how much money we have after my husband gets paid, and then we have to pay the bills, and my husband still works in London at the moment because his industry isn't really in Wales. He works in the video games industry. So if you look at our finances after that, we don't really have much money left. We are very lucky in the sense that we have enough to buy food and things like that, and to do things like buy school uniform and all of the basic stuff, and have cats. But at the moment, for example, my parents pay as a Christmas and birthday present for my son to do a drama club because we can't afford that right now. And we're very lucky to have family who will and have done that. Very lucky. But because food prices were set to rise a lot, I knew that we were going to be really struggling, so I kept some food, and we also donate to food banks, like long-lasting food, so that you know, people who have not enough money to eat will get something. But if we'd left with no deal, there were threats that water could be cut off to certain homes, electricity could be cut off. I actually have purifying water tablets just in case, because we're near some rivers, so we would have been able to go and get river water to use. Which, I mean, all of this sounds bonkers, right? But I think it's better to be safe than sorry, and I think that we have to be realistic about what they were trying to do, which is to leave without a deal. I think that they would have done it if they hadn't been fought. We marched in the People's Vote March. We marched in Swansea more than once, and then we went with Swansea for Europe down to London to march there. I can show you the little sign that my son helped make. So I've kind of said that in my Witchcraft, I also find that because I do think that I have a responsibility politically and, you know, within the wider society, which I know, like, not all of you will feel, and that's fine, but it's what I feel. I also have a responsibility as a parent to bring up a child who, as an adult, is going to be wanting the best for the majority, and not, you know, and not wanting groups to be segregated and hurt. So anyway, so I take him to quite a few political marches. They are the safer ones because I've been to some of the ones that aren't as safe before I had Orion, and I wouldn't want, I think it would be very threatening and scary for him to see his parents arrested or anything like that. So we don't do that right now while he's at this age especially. But what we do is when we go to the marches, if we're marching about a specific person, Orion compares them to a character that he might know from fairy tale or a children's story, and it helps him to understand, once we talk about kind of the political ramifications of the person's decisions, and we talk about the negative aspects that we're marching against. It helps him to understand it if he can relate it to something that he already knows. So he chose the big bad wolf. It's a bit, the rain hit it, so it is a bit smudged. But it says, "Who's afraid of the big bad Boris? Not us." And then at the bottom it had, "Stop prorogation, hear us speak." And then that said Remain, but you can't see that anymore. And yeah, that's his little Brexit sticker that he got, and he got a whistle. He's allowed to blow it as loudly as he likes at marches, which he's a big fan of. So, you know, we marched against prorogation, which I believe isn't legal. The way that he did it isn't legal. He was trying to force something through, and that's something that I will always stand against. I don't believe it should be forced through, just like I don't believe in the use of propaganda that's been going on. And I think, you know, as witches, we have this power to look at what our magic might be able to do. So I think it's really important that we can kind of look and say, okay, where are we right now? So what can we do outside of witchcraft to make changes? And what can we do within our witchcraft? You know, can we cast a spell that opens people's eyes and wakes them up to what's going on and gets them to start asking questions and saying, well, do you know what? You know, I don't believe that this headline is true, because a lot of people have a kind of frame of mind that looks at something, and because it's been written down, and this happens on social media, you know, it's well known for happening on social media, but it also happens in actual media. You know, we have like something published in a newspaper, and people go, well, it's published in the newspaper, so it's got to be true. And they don't say, where did these statistics come from? You know, where did this research come from? Who backed the research? Why are the media saying this? Is there something that they want from this? Who's funding that media? And what are their views? People aren't asking these questions. You know, why does our Prime Minister want to leave the EU? Because it's nothing to do with the things that he's saying. You know, why is the whole thing with Russia happening? There are a lot of questions, aren't there, that you can ask. But I think the bizarre thing is that we've even had kind of drama documentaries made, and documentaries about how we ended up in this situation as the UK, and still people aren't seeing it, partly because they don't want to believe it. You know, who wants to believe that the government is acting based purely on what's good for itself and not what's good for the country? People don't want to believe that. People don't want to believe that Boris Johnson would sell the NHS, even though the Conservatives are continually privatising things. You know, they have even done things like given privatised areas of it misleading names so that people don't realise it's a privatised section of the NHS. And there's this difficulty as well, like where I am in Wales. Wales has a Labour Assembly government, and people are saying, look, Labour's in the Assembly government and nothing's getting better. But what they're failing to understand is that that government's funding comes from the UK government. So that's Conservative, right? So if you have no funding, then even though you're wanting to put these great systems in place and make these changes, you can't do that because you're not being given the backing to do it. You're not having the money put in that you can spend. It doesn't matter, you know, it doesn't matter what my intentions are if I'm given a penny to go and change something. I'm not going to be able to change it, am I? But if I'm given, you know, millions, I'm going to be able to make the change. It's not like a necessary thing for a witch to be involved in politics, but I think it can be a really great thing for a witch to be involved in politics, and for us to be saying, why don't we take this on ourselves and start to make these changes? Because surely if enough of us do it, these changes can be made. There is that story about how people cast a spell to protect England during the Second World War from the Nazis invading, and that no Nazi foot would be able to step on English soil. And whether you believe it or not, I think that's a really powerful thing to be thinking about right now. And if you're in the UK, sorry, my son's here. If you're in the UK, I think it's really important that you think and you vote after you've asked these questions.
How's that paused?
It's not paused. I'm going to pause it now, and then I'm going to end by just looking at the Tory manifesto and breaking down some of its points. So, for people who are looking at voting, the Conservative manifesto, the top claims are firstly an increase in police by 20,000. But I want to highlight that in their time in government, police numbers have fallen between 19 to 22,000. So this claim is purely to reinstate a rough number of police who were originally cut by them. Also, if you're looking at the laws that they want to enforce, do we want a Conservative government who are, in charge of or funding that police force? Second claim is to have 50,000 more nurses. So firstly, this is a lie and includes 19,000 nurses who are already employed. Secondly, Tory policies seriously damage the NHS and continues to do so. So if we look at the junior doctors' strike, we can see how unhappy people working in the NHS really are with the government. If we look at the reduction of 15,000 patient beds, and that's equivalent to 30 district hospitals. Look at the A&E waiting times, with patients being treated in corridors because there are not any beds, and that's including the elderly and children. The huge difficulty in being seen and listened to by a general practitioner because they are underfunded, understaffed, overworked, and often forgotten. That they're real people. So they're under immense pressure. And, real people who haven't had much sleep, who are dealing with immense pressure, they make mistakes. And that's not a good position for us to be in. So the Conservatives also claim that they want to reach net zero by 2050. First of all, that isn't a good enough target in my eyes. Secondly, do we really believe them? Because they scrapped a lot of green policy. And in 2015, they scrapped support for offshore wind, solar wind farms, solar subsidies. They were axed. It was confirmed that they were removing the guaranteed level of RO subsidy. They got rid of the Green Homes Scheme. They reduced incentives for greener cars, gave up on zero carbon homes, engaged in fracking in very important nature areas, which as a witch, nature is so important. Do we really want to support that? And what can we do to stop that? Can we call on the nature spirits to help? Because that's certainly what my response to that is. So also, they have said that they won't raise the rate of income tax, VAT or national insurance. So firstly, we can't trust them. Boris Johnson has been shown to lie on so many occasions that recently when he was on television the audience actually laughed when he was asked a question about honesty. Also, for those low on money or struggling, which is obviously increased under the Tory government, you know, it's worth remembering that these are the people who brought in universal credit and PIP, which incidentally, PIP, which is the new disability benefit, you have people who are not medically trained assessing people who are very unwell and applying, to the point where my mother-in-law applied for PIP and she was refused it. She was told that she didn't qualify, and 2 weeks later she actually nearly died. She was in hospital under sedation for a really long time. So, and she looked like she was about to die. You could not argue, even as someone who was non-medically trained, that she was not at medical risk at that point and that she didn't deserve that benefit. They also do things with PIP where they will send you appointments which are difficult to get to, and it can be, for example, I had to apply for PIP. At the time I was in a wheelchair and I couldn't stand, and they sent me an appointment at 9 in the morning, before 9 in the morning even, in Vauxhall, which is literally, it's ages from my house. My husband and I don't drive. My old house was in South London, but this was at least, a bus to a station. If I used the nearest station, I would have had to use steps. So in order to get to a station with disabled access, we'd have to take a bus, then a train to get there. And Vauxhall Station isn't always reliable for disabled access. So we'd have to do all that with my son, who was young at the time. When I phoned to tell them that it wouldn't be possible, I was told I would get one more appointment, but I had to attend it, because if I didn't attend it, then I'd be struck off and I wouldn't really be able to get the benefit. So they sent me another one for 9 in the morning, which was in Chertsey, which was really far away again. It happened to be on the day of the train strikes. Now, I was in a lot of pain at the time, and I didn't feel able to get kind of long stretches of public transport. So we had to pay for a taxi to take us there. Obviously, really expensive thing to do. I left an hour and a half to travel to the appointment, and it was supposed to take about 50 minutes. In the end, we realised we were going to be a little bit late because we were just stuck in traffic. The roads were absolutely packed, so I phoned them to say. And they said they couldn't guarantee that they'd see us. And then we turned up and they tried to refuse to see us. And I said, well, I'm just going to wait here, because at some point in the day, surely someone's going to be free. So if we have to wait here all day, I'm just going to sit here and wait. It's not like I can get up and go somewhere anyway, is it? And in the end, they did see us. But they make it very difficult, Instead of having proper access, they really don't. And I was very lucky, because I had a lot of medical backing for my benefit, and I'm also someone who is relatively able to explain things. I looked really unwell, but then you have, my mother-in-law, who wasn't lucky enough to get it, and she's had to appeal. She has got a few more points on appeal, but she needs someone at home who can care for her full time, so it's so dependent, and it's wrong what they're doing. So they also claim that millions more invested every week in science, schools, apprenticeships and infrastructure whilst controlling debt. But since 2011, school funding has been cut by £7 billion. 4 in 5 teachers are using their own money to support schools and pupils. And parents are having to fund schools as well. 3 in 4 head teachers have asked for parent funding. Schools are being pushed to support more and more children in poverty, with 43% of children living in families experiencing poverty. And obviously 70% of those children are in families with parents who work. So I just want to say, let's look at these governments and look at the countries we're living in and look at the wider society and the issues that people are facing and see if we as witches can do anything about it. I did see on the People's Vote March that there were some witches out there protesting, which was really lovely to see, and to see people being able to openly protest. But yeah, so I'm sorry this has been such a long video and probably a bit waffly, but I just hope it kind of makes people think and realise what we're doing. And I kind of want to apologise really on behalf of the UK for the amount of racist comments coming out of it, and for our twat of a Prime Minister who, he's an embarrassment, and I can't say more than that really. I'm just really sorry. So yeah, much love and many blessings, guys. Feel free to comment and tell me what you think, and let me know if you're going to be voting on Thursday. Much love and many blessings.